Hello, my dear wanderers. It's Soren. Welcome back. Tonight, we journey to the heart of Kyoto, a city where ancient traditions gently touch the present. As you step onto the paths of its quiet gardens, a soft tranquility surrounds you, stone pathways shaded by moss, the distant murmur of a stream, and the delicate rustle of leaves in the cool breeze. The pace of time seems to slow, as if the city is inviting you to pause, breathe, and reflect. So before the silence of night surrounds you, take a moment to like and subscribe, just if this brought you peace of mind. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. Kyoto, the former capital of Japan, is a city that feels as though it is caught between two worlds. One of modern hustle and the other of ancient, peaceful traditions. The gentle flow of time in Kyoto is felt most deeply in its gardens, which have been meticulously crafted and maintained for centuries. These gardens aren't just places of beauty, they're a kind of living poetry designed to encourage quiet contemplation and reflection. In a city known for its temples, shrines, and the famous geisha districts of Gion, the gardens of Kyoto are often the most overlooked treasures. Yet, in many ways, they are the heart of the city. Kyoto's gardens are not grand, sweeping landscapes. Rather, they are intimate spaces meant to be experienced slowly, quietly, and with a certain reverence. They are places where you can almost feel the weight of history, the presence of centuries-old traditions, gently pressing in around you. If you were to walk through Kyoto today, you might find yourself wandering down a small stone path, flanked by moss-covered rocks and ancient pine trees. The sounds of the modern world, traffic, voices, the hum of daily life, are slowly replaced by the soft, rhythmic rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, and the occasional plop of a droplet falling from a tree. It's as if the city itself is encouraging you to slow down, take a breath, and reflect. The gardens of Kyoto are not about grandiose displays or towering fountains. They are minimalist by design, following a principle known as wabi-sabi, which embraces imperfection, transience, and the beauty of the fleeting moment. Every stone, every plant, every drop of water is placed with careful intention, but nothing is ever quite perfect. In these gardens, you might notice a stone out of place, a patch of moss that has grown over a path, or a tree branch that leans at an odd angle. These small imperfections are not mistakes, they are part of the beauty. They remind visitors that nothing lasts forever, and that true beauty often lies in the quiet acceptance of life's transitory nature. One of the most famous gardens in Kyoto is the Zen Garden of Ryoanji, located in the northwestern part of the city. This garden is often considered a perfect example of the wabi-sabi philosophy. It consists of a simple arrangement of 15 stones set upon a bed of white gravel. The stones are placed in such a way that no matter where you stand, you can only see 14 of them at once. The arrangement has puzzled visitors for centuries, and no one is entirely sure of its meaning. Some believe the missing stone represents the impermanence of life, while others think it may symbolize the human tendency to overlook the obvious. The truth, as is often the case in Kyoto, may be less important than the feeling the garden evokes, a feeling of peace, stillness, and quiet contemplation. But it's not just the famous Zen gardens that offer a sense of calm. Kyoto's many other gardens, whether they are the lush, green spaces surrounding its Buddhist temples, or the carefully arranged courtyards of traditional ryokan inns, are all designed to bring visitors into a state of reflection. Many of these gardens feature koi ponds, with their still glass-like surfaces reflecting the surrounding trees and rocks. The koi, with their slow, graceful movements, seem to float effortlessly through the water. Watching them can be meditative in itself, as their steady motion encourages you to match your own breath to their rhythm. Perhaps the most striking feature of Kyoto's gardens is the way they blend the natural world with the human-made. The gardens are full of elements that are clearly shaped by human hands: man-made paths, stone lanterns, intricately pruned trees. But they are designed to appear as if they belong there naturally. It is as though the human and natural worlds are in perfect harmony, each enhancing the other. This blending of nature and human intention can be seen in the famous dry landscape gardens, known as kazansui. These gardens, like the one at Ryanji, are made up of carefully raked gravel and strategically placed rocks, often meant to represent elements of nature, such as mountains, rivers, or islands. The idea behind these gardens is not to mimic nature exactly, but to capture its essence. They allow visitors to step into a world that is both deeply familiar and slightly surreal, where the line between the real and the imagined is often blurred. As you move from one garden to the next, you might notice subtle shifts in atmosphere. One garden might be filled with the soft scent of pine, the sound of water trickling gently over rocks, and the occasional rustle of wind through bamboo leaves. Another might be quieter, more restrained, with only the faintest sound of wind passing through a carefully manicured hedge. These shifts are intentional, a way of guiding you through a sensory experience that is meant to align with your inner state. In Kyoto's gardens, there is always a sense of invitation, a quiet urging to slow down and find peace in the moment. But the gardens of Kyoto are not just spaces of quiet for the sake of quiet. They are also places for spiritual reflection, particularly for those practicing the Zen Buddhist tradition. Zen practitioners often meditate in these gardens, using the space as a kind of mirror for their inner thoughts. The simplicity of the gardens, the stones, the gravel, the trees, helps to clear the mind, offering a serene space in which to focus. It is said that the carefully designed layout of these gardens encourages mindfulness, and many people visit Kyoto's gardens with the intention of using them as a backdrop for meditation. The most famous of Kyoto's Zen gardens, like Ryanji, are often designed with a particular spiritual concept in mind. But not all gardens in Kyoto follow the same strict rules. Some are more fluid, more open to interpretation. For example, the garden at the famous Kinko-kyuji, or Golden Pavilion, is more lush and expansive, with large ponds, lotus flowers, and meticulously placed bridges. While it still offers a sense of tranquility, it is more overtly grand than the subtle elegance of Ryanji. The contrast between these different styles of gardens, the austere simplicity of Zen gardens versus the more vibrant beauty of other garden styles, reflects the broader range of experiences Kyoto offers. There is something for everyone, whether you are looking for deep introspection or simply a quiet place to enjoy nature's beauty. As you wander deeper into the heart of Kyoto's gardens, something subtle but profound begins to shift within you. It's not a dramatic change, but rather a slow, almost imperceptible transformation. The busy thoughts that had clung to your mind like stubborn shadows start to loosen their grip. The buzzing of the modern world, which seemed so loud at first, now feels distant, like a forgotten memory. In these gardens, silence is not an absence of sound, but a space for sound to become meaningful. You might notice the sound of footsteps on gravel, a soft crunch underfoot, rhythmic and steady. Then the faint murmur of water, trickling in small streams or gently splashing into a pond. These sounds aren't loud or intrusive. In fact, they may seem almost faint, as if the environment itself is encouraging you to listen closer, to hear what is usually drowned out by the noise of everyday life. The occasional rustle of leaves, stirred by a soft breeze, feels like a delicate whisper from the trees. It's as if the world is speaking to you, but only if you are still enough to hear it. The ponds, so common in Kyoto's gardens, are more than just aesthetic features. They serve a deeper, meditative purpose. Water in the Japanese tradition symbolizes purity and renewal. The stillness of a pond reflects the clarity of the mind when it is free of distractions. But even in stillness, there is movement. Koi fish glide through the water in slow, deliberate arcs. Their red, white, and black bodies leaving gentle ripples in their wake. Watching them is like watching time itself pass. But in the softest, most soothing way. The pond might look like a mirror, but it's never truly still. There's always a subtle shift, a gentle flow that suggests movement, change, and the passage of time. As the seasons change, so too do the gardens of Kyoto. In spring, cherry blossoms bloom, and the gardens are covered in a delicate blanket of pink petals. The air is filled with the sweet scent of the flowers, and the gardens take on a vibrant energy, as if the earth itself is waking up after a long, cold winter. Yet even in the fullness of spring, there remains a quiet, almost meditative stillness. The flowers may be alive with color, but they don't scream for attention. They simply bloom, gently, quietly, and when they fall, they leave a soft carpet of petals on the ground, a reminder of nature's fleeting beauty. In summer, the gardens are lush and full, with verdant greenery that seems to absorb the sunlight. The trees stand tall and steady, their branches heavy with leaves. The heat of the season gives the gardens a slower, more deliberate energy, as though the entire world is taking its time to bask in the warmth. The sounds of cicadas fill the air, a constant hum that seems to echo the pulse of the earth itself. Yet, even amidst the summer heat, the gardens remain a place of tranquility, offering shade and a cool breeze for those who take the time to pause and appreciate the quiet. Autumn brings a different kind of beauty, one that is more reflective, more contemplative. The vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows of the changing leaves create a kaleidoscope of color, as if the gardens themselves are preparing for their winter rest. The sound of leaves crunching beneath your feet takes on a different meaning in autumn. It's not just the sound of walking, but of transition. The air is crisp, and the gardens seem to slow down even further, as if they are savoring each moment before the cold of winter arrives. And then, when winter comes, the gardens take on a peaceful austerity. The trees are bare, their branches reaching toward the sky in delicate skeletal forms. Snow, if it falls, covers the ground in a quiet blanket, muffling the sounds of the world even further. The gardens seem to sleep, waiting for the warmth of spring to return. But even in this stillness, there is a beauty that cannot be denied. The snowflakes, delicate and ephemeral, fall softly to the ground, and the bare trees, with their graceful limbs, create a kind of quiet, serene elegance. In winter, the gardens seem to hold their breath, awaiting the renewal that will come with the next season. The shifting seasons in Kyoto's gardens serve as a reminder of the cyclical nature of life. The gardens, like life itself, are in constant flux, sometimes vibrant, sometimes still, sometimes full of energy, and sometimes quiet and reserved. The gardens don't force these transitions, they simply allow them to happen. This acceptance of change, of the natural ebb and flow of life, is part of the wisdom that Kyoto's gardens have to offer. They invite you to embrace the passing of time, to find beauty in each season, and to appreciate the stillness that can be found in moments of quiet reflection. Perhaps one of the most powerful aspects of these gardens is the way they seem to slow down time. In the fast-paced world outside, where everything seems to be moving at breakneck speed, the gardens offer a reprieve. They offer a space where you can simply be, where the only thing that matters is the present moment. Whether you are sitting by a koi pond, walking down a moss-covered path, or simply standing under the shade of a centuries-old tree, there is an overwhelming sense that time is both slow and endless in these spaces. It is as if the gardens are inviting you to step outside of time, to enter a world where the only thing that matters is the quietude around you. In this way, Kyoto's gardens become not just a place to visit, but a place to be with oneself, to lose oneself in the peaceful rhythm of nature, to let the subtle sounds of the world around you become a soundtrack for your own thought. There's a certain magic in these gardens, an unspoken promise that if you are willing to slow down, to take a breath, and to open yourself up to the quiet beauty of the world, you can find a kind of peace that is elusive in the outside world. Despite the fame of its most popular gardens, Kyoto is home to many smaller, lesser-known spaces, hidden gems that provide a deeper, even more private kind of tranquility. These gardens are often tucked away behind temple walls, secluded in narrow alleyways, or even concealed in the courtyards of private homes. The beauty of these hidden gardens is not just in their design, but in their quiet seclusion. Few people know of them, and even fewer have the chance to experience their peace. One such garden is the Tetsugaku no Michi, or the Philosopher's Path, which runs along the canal in northern Kyoto. It's a quiet, serene path that winds its way through the city's eastern districts, passing by several small temples and shrines. The path is especially beautiful in spring, when the cherry blossoms are in full bloom, creating a soft, pink canopy overhead. But even without the blossoms, the walk along the canal is calming in its simplicity. The water moves slowly beside you, and the path is lined with trees that seem to lean over the canal, their branches almost brushing the surface of the water. Along this path, you may find yourself stopping to admire the beauty of a stone lantern, the stillness of the water, or the distant chime of a temple bell. While the Philosopher's Path offers a taste of Kyoto's more private, hidden beauty, it is only one example of the many secret gardens that are scattered throughout the city. Many of these gardens are designed not just for aesthetic enjoyment, but for quiet reflection and spiritual practice. Some of them belong to private homes, where only a handful of people are allowed to visit. Others are tucked away in the grounds of small, lesser-known temples, where visitors can take a quiet stroll through a peaceful, secluded environment. One particularly special garden is located at the Nanzenji Temple, which is one of Kyoto's oldest and most famous Zen temples. The garden here is a masterpiece of design, with a large pond surrounded by carefully placed rocks and manicured trees. But what makes this garden truly unique is the quietness of the space. The sound of water trickling through a small stream is the only noise that breaks the silence. As you stand by the water's edge, you might notice the way the light plays on the surface of the pond, creating a shimmering effect that seems to dance before your eyes. The garden is so peaceful that you may find it hard to leave, drawn in by the stillness that seems to permeate every corner of the space. The beauty of Kyoto's secret gardens lies in their quiet simplicity. These gardens are not meant to impress with grand displays of color or elaborate designs. Instead, they invite visitors to stop, to look closely, and to appreciate the subtle details that often go unnoticed. The moss-covered stones, the delicate patterns in the gravel, the way the sunlight filters through the trees, all of these small elements combine to create a sense of peace that feels both timeless and fragile. The quiet of these gardens is not just a lack of noise, it is a kind of presence, an invitation to connect with the world on a deeper, more introspective level. Perhaps the most striking feature of these hidden spaces is how they seem to offer an escape from the noise of the outside world. In a city that is constantly bustling with life, it's easy to forget how precious stillness can be. Yet in these gardens, the world outside seems to disappear. You can hear the distant hum of traffic, but it feels far removed, as if you have stepped into a different time, a time when silence was valued above all else. The gardens are a reminder that peace is not something that can be found in external circumstances, but something that comes from within. One of the most famous secret gardens in Kyoto is the garden at the Kiyomizu-dera temple, which offers a stunning view of the city. The temple itself is one of Kyoto's most iconic landmarks, with its massive wooden stage that overlooks the forest below. But what many visitors don't realize is that the temple's garden is just as remarkable. Hidden behind the main hall is a small, tranquil space filled with moss-covered stones and ancient trees. The garden is often overlooked by tourists who are too busy taking in the view from the temple's stage. But for those who take the time to seek out this hidden gem, it offers a rare moment of peace and solitude. The gentle rustle of the trees, the soft glow of the moss, and the quiet presence of the garden create a sense of stillness that feels almost sacred. In Kyoto's secret gardens, there is always something new to discover. These spaces are not just designed for quiet contemplation, but for a deeper connection with nature. The way the wind moves through the trees, the pattern of the leaves as they fall, the subtle shift in the light as the day progresses. All of these details are an invitation to slow down and experience the world in a way that is often impossible in the rush of daily life. There is something almost meditative about these gardens. They encourage visitors to step out of time, to forget the demands of the outside world, and to lose themselves in the beauty of the natural world. It is said that time moves differently in Kyoto's gardens, that minutes stretch into hours, and hours seem to slip away unnoticed. This sense of timelessness is what makes Kyoto's secret gardens so special. They offer a kind of escape from the pressures of modern life, a place where the only thing that matters is the moment at hand. Kyoto, with its tranquil gardens and quiet spaces, is a city that seems to exist outside of time, a place where the noise of the world is muted and where peace can be found in the smallest details. These gardens invite visitors to slow down, to reflect, and to embrace the present moment. Whether you are sitting by a koi pond, strolling through a moss-covered path, or simply standing in the shade of an ancient tree, there is a quiet beauty in these spaces that speaks to something deep within the soul. It is a beauty that cannot be rushed or forced, but must be experienced slowly, with patience and reverence. As the gardens of Kyoto cycle through the changing seasons, their character evolves in ways that invite reflection on the passage of time. Just as the leaves transform, so too does the atmosphere in the garden. Each season brings with it a distinct kind of stillness, a quiet beauty that feels almost like a meditation on impermanence. The gardens teach us that change is not something to resist, but something to accept and appreciate. In Kyoto, each season offers its own quiet invitation to slow down, to reflect, and to find peace in the passing of time. In spring, the gardens are alive with color, but even then, the beauty is soft and gentle. The cherry blossom, or sakura, are the stars of the season, their delicate pink flowers covering the trees in a blanket of blossoms. As you walk through the gardens, you might find yourself looking up at the branches admiring the soft, ethereal beauty of the flowers as they flutter to the ground. The sight of the blossoms falling, like a gentle snowfall, reminds visitors of the fleeting nature of life. A theme that runs throughout Kyoto's gardens. The cherry blossoms are not meant to last forever, and in that brief period when they are in bloom, they remind us of the transient beauty that can be found in moments of fragility. Yet spring in Kyoto is not just about the cherry blossoms. The gardens also come alive with a different kind of energy, as the trees and plants begin to stir from their winter rest. The air is fresh and crisp, carrying with it the scent of new growth. The moss, which is so central to the garden's design, turns a deep, vibrant green. The sound of birds singing fills the air, and the atmosphere feels lighter, more alive. It's a season of renewal, where the gardens are a living reminder that after the cold and stillness of winter, new life always returns. By the time summer arrives, the gardens are in full bloom. The once crisp air has turned warmer, and the greenery that surrounds the gardens has reached its peak. The trees are heavy with leaves, their branches full and lush. The ponds, which in spring had been clear and still, are now full of the vibrant life of koi fish and lily pads. The sound of cicadas, their calls filling the air like a constant hum, creates a kind of backdrop to the serenity of the gardens. Summer in Kyoto is a time of quiet abundance, where the gardens seem to hold everything in their grasp. Every blade of grass, every petal, every ripple in the water, all thriving in the heat. Despite the abundance of summer, the gardens never lose their sense of peace. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the soft rippling of the water, and the delicate flutter of a butterfly's wings create a soothing symphony of quiet sound. Even as the city outside grows hotter and more crowded, the gardens remain cool, offering respite from the summer heat. It is a reminder that no matter how chaotic the world may seem, there is always a place of calm to be found, even in the most sweltering of seasons. As the heat of summer wanes, the gardens begin their transition into autumn, a season that brings with it a certain kind of melancholy beauty. The trees, once full of green, begin to turn shades of red, orange, and yellow. The air cools, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot becomes a familiar one. Autumn in Kyoto is a season of reflection, where the gardens feel more introspective, almost as if they are preparing for the stillness of winter. The change in the leaves is a visual representation of the passage of time, of the inevitability of change, and of the beauty that can be found in every phase of life. Walking through the gardens in autumn, you might notice how the once bright colors of summer fade into deeper, more muted tones. The air feels crisp, and the light seems softer, as if the sun itself has slowed down. The koi in the ponds are less active, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they too are entering a phase of quiet contemplation. The gardens seem to invite visitors to pause, to take a moment to reflect on the year that has passed, and to appreciate the beauty that exists in the quieter, more subdued moments. Then, when winter arrives, the gardens transform once again. The trees, stripped of their leaves, stand like bare skeletons, their branches reaching up toward the sky in delicate, intricate patterns. The moss, which had been so lush and green in the spring and summer, takes on a different texture, the bare stones beneath it more apparent. The air is sharp and cold, and the gardens seem to hold their breath, waiting for the warmth of spring to return. In the winter months, Kyoto's gardens take on a quiet austerity. Snow, if it falls, covers the ground in a soft, pristine blanket. The silence that descends is thick and profound, almost as if the entire world is in deep meditation. The gardens, stripped of their vibrancy, seem to invite visitors to experience the beauty of emptiness. There is a kind of stillness that fills the air, and for those willing to embrace it, the gardens offer a rare opportunity to connect with the quiet, contemplative side of nature. The beauty of winter in Kyoto's gardens is not in their outward appearance, but in the way they invite visitors to find peace in the absence of life. The bare trees, the quiet of the ponds, and the soft, falling snow offer a moment of introspection, a chance to pause and reflect on the year that has passed. The gardens, now bare and silent, seem to ask nothing of you, except to simply be present in the moment. In their quiet simplicity, they offer a space where time itself seems to stand still. The changing seasons in Kyoto's gardens are more than just a visual spectacle. They're a meditation on the passage of time, on the cycles of nature, and on the impermanence of life. In each season, the gardens offer a different kind of peace, a different way of experiencing the world, whether it's the fresh renewal of spring, the lush abundance of summer, the reflective beauty of autumn, or the quiet stillness of winter. Each season in Kyoto's gardens offers a moment to slow down, to reflect, and to find peace in the ever-changing rhythms of life. There is something almost magical about the way the gardens of Kyoto seem to reflect the inner world of the visitor. Each garden, no matter its size or design, offers a quiet mirror for one's thoughts and emotion. In the stillness of the gardens, the external world fades away, and all that remains is the present moment, the rustling of leaves, the ripples in the water, and the slow passage of time. The gardens invite you to look inward, to find clarity and stillness, to reflect on your own inner state. In Kyoto, gardens are not just places to visit, but places to experience. They encourage a deep, almost instinctive kind of mindfulness, where the act of simply being in the space is enough to bring a sense of peace. It's not about doing, not about achieving a certain goal. It's about being present, taking in the beauty of the surroundings, and letting go of all the distractions that usually fill our minds. Some gardens, like the one at Ginkakuji, the Silver Pavilion, are designed specifically to encourage contemplation. The simple layout of the garden, with its winding paths, quiet ponds, and carefully placed stones, creates a kind of rhythmic flow. The viewer is guided through the space, invited to stop and appreciate the subtle details. A single stone in a bed of moss, the gentle curve of a tree branch, the soft movement of water in a stream. In gardens like these, every element is designed to guide you toward a sense of stillness, toward a quiet, reflective state of mind. But it's not just the physical beauty of the gardens that encourages reflection. The design of the gardens themselves often carries deep spiritual meaning. In many cases, the gardens are built to mirror aspects of Buddhist teachings, particularly those associated with Zen practice. For example, the placement of rocks in Zen gardens is often meant to represent elements of nature, mountains, rivers, or islands, but also to symbolize deeper spiritual concepts. The emptiness between the rocks represents the space between thoughts, a quiet space where the mind can settle. The raked gravel symbolizes the flow of time, with each line representing a moment passing by, moving steadily forward, never to return. The garden at Ryoenji, the famous Zen garden with its 15 stones, is a prime example of how gardens can function as both physical spaces and spiritual tools. The arrangement of the stones is said to represent a kind of cosmic balance, where each stone has its own place, its own role, but is still part of a larger whole. The fact that no matter where you stand in the garden, you can only see 14 of the stones at once, encourages the viewer to contemplate the idea of imperfection and absence. It's a quiet invitation to look beyond what is immediately in front of you, to acknowledge what is hidden, and to accept the mystery of life's unanswered questions. These Zen gardens, with their spare minimalist design, encourage a kind of quiet meditation on the impermanence of life. The gravel, which is meticulously raked in patterns that resemble flowing water or waves, suggests the transient nature of time. It is a visual representation of the Buddhist concept of mu or nothingness, a state of mind that is free from attachment and filled with infinite possibility. In this way, the gardens become not just a place to escape the noise of the world, but a space where one can confront the deepest truths of existence. But even in gardens that are not strictly Zen in design, there is still an invitation to reflect on the transient nature of life, the changing seasons, the shifting light, and the inevitable decay of plants and flowers. All serve as reminders that nothing lasts forever. There is beauty in the present moment, but that beauty is fleeting, and the gardens offer a space to reflect on that fleeting quality. In a world that is often preoccupied with permanence, whether it's the pursuit of wealth, fame, or success, the gardens of Kyoto remind us that true peace can be found in embracing the temporary, in accepting that everything, even the most beautiful things, will eventually pass. The act of walking through the gardens themselves is often described as a form of moving meditation. As you walk along the stone paths, past the koi ponds, and through the moss-covered arches, the rhythm of your steps becomes a kind of grounding. It's as if the path itself is inviting you to step away from your usual pace of life, to slow down and enter into a quieter, more contemplative state. The gardens encourage you to focus on the details, the feel of the stone beneath your feet, the coolness of the air, the scent of the moss. It is an experience that invites mindfulness in the most subtle, natural way. In Kyoto's gardens, time seems to slow down. The slow, deliberate movements of the koi fish, the gentle swaying of the trees in the breeze, and the soft sound of gravel shifting beneath your feet all create a kind of rhythm that invites you to follow. The gardens don't rush, and they don't demand anything of you. They simply are. They exist in a quiet, peaceful state of being. And in that being they offer a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. Perhaps the most profound lesson that Kyoto's gardens have to offer is the lesson of patience. These gardens have been carefully tended for centuries, and in their design they ask visitors to slow down, to take their time, and to appreciate the process of growth and change. Whether it's the slow growth of a moss-covered stone or the gradual turning of leaves in autumn, the gardens remind us that life is a process, not a destination. The beauty of these gardens is not in any single moment, but in the way they change, evolve, and invite us to grow along with them. Kyoto's gardens are more than just places of beauty. They are reflections of the deeper truths of life. They invite us to look inward, to contemplate the passage of time, and to accept the impermanence of everything around us. The quiet spaces they offer become mirrors for our own thoughts and feelings, and in that quiet, we find a kind of peace that is rare in the outside world. In the stillness of Kyoto's gardens, time seems to stretch and bend, becoming something more fluid, more gentle. It is a place where the present moment is all that matters, where the past and future fade away, and where the soul can find respite in the simple beauty of the world. Behind the serene beauty of Kyoto's gardens lies a quiet army of caretakers, dedicated to maintaining these peaceful oases. The gardeners of Kyoto, often known as niwashi, are not just skilled horticulturists. They are stewards of a tradition that has been passed down through generations. Their work is not just about making the gardens look beautiful. It is about preserving the delicate balance of nature and spirit that the gardens represent. In Kyoto, gardening is not merely a profession. It is a spiritual practice, a way of connecting with nature and the universe. The niwashi are often associated with Zen temples, where they serve not only as gardeners but also as spiritual guides, helping to maintain the sense of tranquility and reverence that pervades the gardens. For them, gardening is an art form, a meditative practice that requires patience, precision, and deep respect for the natural world. Each plant, each stone, each ripple in the water is tended to with care and attention, as if the gardener is not just cultivating a garden, but nurturing the soul of the space itself. The act of raking gravel, for example, is one of the most iconic elements of Kyoto's Zen gardens. To the untrained eye, it might appear to be a simple task, just moving a rake through the gravel in gentle, flowing patterns. But to the niwashi, the act of raking is much more than that. It is a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the earth and creating a sense of harmony within the space. The rhythm of the rake, the pattern of the gravel, and the quiet movement of the gardener's hands all work together to create a sense of balance, both in the garden and in the heart of the gardener. There is a deep sense of reverence that pervades the work of the niwashi. These gardeners understand that they are not just tending to plants and stones, but to something far more sacred, the spirit of the garden itself. In Kyoto's Zen gardens, where every rock and every piece of gravel is placed with intentionality, the niwashi serve as both caretakers and guardians of the space. They are entrusted with maintaining the delicate balance of the garden, ensuring that it continues to offer a place of peace, reflection, and spiritual renewal for those who visit. At temples like Ryoanji, the work of the niwashi is especially important. The garden, with its famous arrangement of 15 stones, is a spiritual tool as much as it is a visual one. The way the stones are placed, the way the gravel is raked, and the way the water flows, all of these elements are designed to encourage contemplation and mindfulness. The niwashi at Ryoanji, therefore, are not just maintaining a beautiful garden, they are preserving a space that is integral to the Zen practice of meditation. Their work is essential to the temple's spiritual function, ensuring that the garden remains a place of quiet reflection for generations to come. But the niwashi's role goes beyond just the Zen temples. Kyoto's many private gardens, often attached to traditional ryokan inns or private homes, are also carefully tended by gardeners who bring their own sense of devotion to their work. In these smaller, more intimate spaces, the work of the niwashi may go unnoticed by most visitors. Yet, even in these quiet gardens, the gardener's touch is evident. The moss-covered stones, the carefully pruned branches, and the gentle flow of water all speak to the meticulous care and attention that the niwashi pour into their work. These private gardens, while not as famous as those at Ryoanji or Kinkakuji, are just as important to the fabric of Kyoto. They are quiet sanctuaries, offering peace to those lucky enough to stumble upon them. The work of the niwashi also reflects the deep connection between nature and the human spirit. Gardening in Kyoto is not a task that is separate from the rest of life. It is a practice that is interwoven with the rhythms of the seasons, the passage of time, and the ebb and flow of nature itself. The niwashi are in tune with these cycles. They know when to prune, when to plant, and when to let things grow wild. They understand that the garden is not something to be controlled or forced into perfection. Instead, it is a space that must be allowed to evolve, to change, and to reflect the natural world in all of its complexity. In many ways, the work of the niwashi is a reflection of the philosophy that underlies Kyoto's gardens. the idea of embracing imperfection and change, just as the gardens are not meant to be perfect. Neither is the gardener's work. The Nuwashi's job is not to make the garden flawless, but to guide it along a path that reflects the natural cycles of growth and decay. The beauty of the garden lies in its imperfections, in the way the moss slowly grows over the stones, in the way the trees bend and twist in the wind, in the way the seasons change and bring new life to the space. One of the most important aspects of the Nuwashi's work is the idea of ma, or the space between things. This concept, which is deeply embedded in Japanese culture, refers to the emptiness or pause between elements. In the context of Kyoto's gardens, it is the space between the stones, the gaps between the trees, and the quiet moments between the sounds of nature. The Nuwashi understand that these spaces are just as important as the elements that fill them. They are the spaces that allow for reflection, for silence, and for the mind to rest. In this way, the work of the gardener is not just about creating beauty, but about creating a space for stillness and contemplation. As the seasons pass, the Nuwashi continue their work, tending to the gardens with the same quiet dedication that has been passed down through generations. Their work may go unnoticed by most visitors, but for those who take the time to pause, to sit quietly in the garden, the presence of the Nuwashi is felt in the very air. Their devotion to their craft, their respect for the natural world, and their understanding of the spiritual nature of the gardens all combine to create a space that is much more than just a collection of plants and stones. It is a living, breathing space, one that reflects the deep wisdom and reverence that Kyoto's gardens have to offer. Kyoto's gardens, with their timeless beauty and quiet charm, are not just a reflection of the past. They are an ongoing journey, one that continues to evolve with the passage of time. While the gardens themselves may have been created centuries ago, they remain living entities, constantly changing and adapting to the rhythms of nature and the lives of those who tend to them. In this way, the gardens of Kyoto are not static relics of a bygone era. They are vibrant, dynamic spaces that are very much a part of the present. This enduring connection between the past and the present is one of the things that makes Kyoto's gardens so special. They are not simply preserved as historical artifacts. They are actively engaged with the world around them. The practice of maintaining these gardens, whether it's the meticulous raking of gravel, the careful pruning of trees, or the thoughtful placement of stones, reminds us that the beauty of these spaces is not something that can be taken for granted. It requires constant attention, patience, and respect for the natural cycles of the world. The gardens of Kyoto are also a living testament to the cultural and spiritual practices that have shaped the city for centuries. Many of the city's gardens are deeply intertwined with Buddhist teachings, particularly those of the Zen tradition. These gardens were designed not just for aesthetic pleasure, but to encourage spiritual contemplation, offering a space for meditation and reflection. The simplicity and stillness these gardens reflect the Zen emphasis on mindfulness, impermanence, and the interconnectedness of all things. In this way, the gardens are not just beautiful landscapes, they are sacred spaces, designed to foster a deeper connection with nature, with oneself, and with the universe. In many ways, Kyoto's gardens are a kind of cultural bridge between the past and the future. They connect the wisdom of ancient traditions with the needs of the modern world, offering a space where people can step away from the noise and demands of daily life and reconnect with a simpler, more peaceful way of being. In today's fast-paced, technology-driven world, the gardens of Kyoto offer a rare opportunity to slow down, to reflect, and to find peace in the present moment. They are a sanctuary for anyone seeking respite from the constant distractions of modern life, a place where time seems to slow and the mind can find clarity. As Kyoto continues to grow and evolve, the city's gardens remain a constant, grounding presence. They are a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, there are some things that remain timeless. The gardens offer a space where one can step outside the whirlwind of modernity and find solace in the simple, quiet beauty of the natural world. They remind us that peace and stillness are not found in external circumstances, but in our ability to connect with the present moment and the world around us. The legacy of Kyoto's gardens is also a living one, passed down through generations of gardeners, temple caretakers, and ordinary citizens who continue to care for and nurture these sacred spaces. As long as people continue to visit, to reflect, and to care for the gardens, the cycle will continue. These gardens are not just relics of the past, but active participants in the ongoing story of Kyoto's culture and spiritual life. The care and attention that has been lavished upon them for centuries ensures that they will continue to serve as places of reflection, beauty, and peace for generations to come. In the quiet spaces of Kyoto's gardens, one can feel the weight of history pressing gently on the shoulders. Yet it is not a heavy weight. It is a presence that invites you to pause, to breathe, and to appreciate the delicate balance of life. Whether you are sitting on a stone bench, watching koi swim lazily in a pond, or simply standing among the trees, the gardens offer a moment to reflect on the impermanence of all things and the beauty that can be found in accepting that transience. And as you stand there, surrounded by the soft rustle of leaves and the faint sound of running water, you might find yourself remembering that these gardens, though ancient, are not simply the product of a distant past. They are alive, and they are still part of the world today. They are places where the rhythms of nature, the teachings of Zen, and the wisdom of the past continue to unfold. They are a living legacy, inviting all who visit to step into a space where time slows, where beauty and peace are found in the quiet spaces between the moments. Kyoto's gardens, in all their peaceful serenity, remind us that the path to tranquility is not a destination, but a journey. It is a journey that begins with a single step, a single moment of stillness, and continues with each breath we take as we move through the world. In the gardens of Kyoto, that journey becomes a little easier to make, a little quieter, a little more reflective, and a lot more peaceful. The gardens of Kyoto are a quiet, enduring testament to the power of nature and human intention to create spaces of peace and reflection. They are not just a part of Kyoto's history, but a living, breathing part of its present. A place where the flow of time is measured not by minutes, but by the changing seasons and the gentle growth of plants. The gardens offer more than just a physical space. They offer an invitation to step away from the busyness of life and embrace the stillness that exists at the heart of nature. For those who take the time to wander through these gardens, there is a deep sense of invitation, an invitation to pause, to breathe, and to reflect. The quiet paths, the moss-covered stones, the flowing streams, and the carefully pruned trees all come together to create a space that encourages introspection. There is no rush in Kyoto's gardens, no need to hurry, no pressure to move faster, to see more, or to do more. The gardens are a place where you can be still, and in that stillness, find a deeper connection to the world around you. And yet, despite their calmness, Kyoto's gardens are full of life. They are alive with the gentle sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the soft ripple of water, the occasional splash of a koi breaking the surface of a pond. Even in winter, when the gardens seem to be at rest, there is a quiet energy that pervades the space, a kind of dormant life that waits patiently for the warmth of spring to return. The gardens are living, ever-changing entities, reflecting the cycles of life and nature in their steady, tranquil rhythms. It is in this quiet cycle of life that the true beauty of Kyoto's gardens lies. The gardens teach us that peace is not something that can be forced or hurried. It is something that must be cultivated over time, something that requires patience, respect, and a deep connection to the natural world. The gardens are not about perfection. They are about balance. They are about accepting the natural flow of time with all its changes and transition, from the blossoms of spring to the bare branches of winter. Each season brings its own kind of peace, and each offers a chance to reflect on the passage of time and the beauty of the present moment. In Kyoto, the gardens offer more than just a place to escape from the world. They offer a space where the mind can find clarity, where the heart can find peace, and where the soul can find rest. Whether it's the quiet simplicity of a Zen garden, the lush beauty of a temple courtyard, or the secluded tranquility of a private ryokan garden, each space provides an opportunity to slow down, to reconnect, and to embrace the present moment. The gardens of Kyoto invite us to remember that in the hustle and bustle of daily life, there is always a place of stillness, a place of peace, if we are willing to seek it out. And so, as the gardens continue to evolve with the changing seasons, they stand as a reminder of the enduring power of nature and the timeless wisdom of Kyoto's traditions. The gardens are not just a reflection of the past, but a living, breathing part of the present and future. They are a space where time slows, where beauty is found in imperfection, and where peace can be found in the simple act of being. As you leave the gardens, whether for the first time or after many visits, you may feel that something has shifted inside of you. Perhaps it is a sense of calm or a moment of quiet reflection. Perhaps it is the realization that peace doesn't need to be sought after, but simply embraced. The gardens of Kyoto remind us that stillness is not a place to be reached, but a state of being that exists right here, right now. In this way, Kyoto's gardens offer a gift, a gentle, quiet invitation to slow down, to reflect, and to find peace in the world around us. Whether you visit once or return again and again, the gardens are always there, waiting for you to pause, to breathe, and to be. They are a lasting presence, a reminder that in the midst of a world that is constantly moving, there is always a space for stillness, always a place where peace can be found, if only we take the time to look for it. One tale may end, but history never leaves us empty-handed. The moment one door shuts, another creaks open, spilling out a stranger secret, a darker echo, and a path we can't resist following. This is the timeless taverns of Transylvania, legends over firesides. Transylvania, nestled deep in the heart of Romania, is a land of ancient forests, jagged mountains, and misty valleys, a place steeped in mystery and legend. It's a region that seems to exist outside of time, where the past lingers like a shadow over the present. The towns and villages here, with their cobblestone streets and centuries-old buildings, hold echoes of another age, one in which life was simpler, but also shrouded in a kind of quiet unease. One of the most enduring aspects of Transylvanian life, both past and present, is its taverns. These humble, unassuming places were not just spots for a drink or a meal. They were the heart of the community, the place where stories were shared, and where the veil between the living and the dead seemed at times a little thinner. The taverns of Transylvania were places of refuge, warmth, and companionship in a land that could be cold, both physically and metaphorically. As night fell, these taverns became sanctuaries, where the flickering light of the fire would cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The crackling of the fire was accompanied by the murmur of voices, stories passed down through generations, some of them so old that they had long ceased to be distinguishable from the fabric of the land itself. It was here, in these taverns, that the legends of Transylvania came alive. The people who gathered around the fire weren't just drinking for the sake of it. They were part of something deeper. They were participating in a tradition that tied them to the land, to their ancestors, and to the mysterious forces that seemed to linger in the dark corners of the world. These taverns, often built of stone and wood, were cozy but ancient, with low ceilings and small, intimate spaces. The scent of wood smoke and roasting meat would fill the air, mixing with the sharp tang of local wines and the earthy aroma of freshly baked bread. It was a world away from the bright lights and bustling energy of the cities. Here, time moved at its own pace, slower perhaps, but somehow richer for it. The fires in the hearths were not just for warmth. They were the heart of the tavern, and the focal point of the stories that were shared. Many of these taverns were located in the villages that dotted the Transylvanian countryside, or along the winding roads that cut through the dense forests. Some of the oldest were situated in the shadow of castles, imposing, crumbling structures that stood like silent sentinels over the land, their walls steeped in history and superstition. These castles, often associated with the likes of Vlad the Impaler and other infamous figures, loomed over the taverns like specters from the past. The villagers would whisper stories of these dark figures, passing them from one generation to the next, and it was not uncommon to hear a tale of vampires, ghosts, or curses as the evening wore on. The taverns, in many ways, were a microcosm of Transylvanian life. They were places of community and connection, but also of mystery and danger. It was in these taverns that one could hear the stories that bound the people to the land. Stories of strange occurrences in the mountains, of unexplained lights in the forest, and of things that walked in the shadows when the moon was full. Some of these stories were grounded in local lore, while others were more personal tales, told by travelers who had passed through the region and experienced something they could not explain. These stories were never just for entertainment. They were warnings, reminders of the unseen forces that shaped the land and the lives of those who lived there. The legends of Transylvania, as told around the firesides of its taverns, are woven into the fabric of the land itself. They are stories of ancient creatures, powerful spirits, and dark forces that still, to this day, haunt the hills and valleys. These legends are not just relics of the past, but living, breathing entities that continue to shape the way the people of Transylvania view the world. They are a way of making sense of the unknown, of understanding the dangers that lurk in the darkness, and of finding a sense of comfort in the face of that fear. In these taverns, it was easy to forget the outside world, the busy, modern life that was slowly creeping into the villages and towns of Transylvania. The taverns remained timeless, unchanged by the march of progress. The faces of the people who gathered around the fire may have changed, but the stories they shared were the same as those that had been passed down through generations. The taverns, like the land itself, were steeped in history, in mystery, and in a kind of quiet reverence for the past. For those who sought something more than just a drink, the taverns of Transylvania offered an opportunity to connect with the land's deep, dark history. These were places where the boundary between the living and the dead seemed almost non-existent, where the past was never truly gone, but lingered like a shadow just out of sight. It was here, in these humble yet mysterious spaces, that the legends of Transylvania would come alive, whispering their secrets into the flickering firelight and into the hearts of those who listen. As the fire crackled and the shadows stretched long across the low stone walls of the tavern, the stories began to flow. in the warmth of the room, where the chill of Transylvania's mountain air could not reach. The darkness outside seemed to take on a life of its own. The villagers, their faces worn and weathered from years of living in a land that had seen both beauty and brutality, would share tales that spoke of the strange and the supernatural. These were not mere stories of fantasy, but accounts woven into the fabric of everyday life. Tales of encounters with spirits, of creatures that lurked in the forests, and of inexplicable events that left people wondering if the world they knew was truly as it seemed. In a corner of the tavern, an old man might begin, his voice low and gravelly, weaving a tale about the restless souls of the dead. These souls, it was said, never truly left the land. They walked among the living, unseen by most, but ever present. Sometimes they would appear at the edges of the firelight, their faces obscured by the dark, their footsteps barely audible as they moved through the room. There was an understanding in these villages that the dead had a kind of power, a lingering influence on the living, especially those who had been wronged in life. Some villagers claimed to have heard strange whispers on the wind, voices calling their names from the shadows of the forests, from the hillsides, or even from the corners of the tavern itself. It was common for the tavern patrons to speak in hushed tones about the long-forgotten lords and ladies who once ruled over the land. Their castles, now crumbling, were said to be haunted by the ghosts of those who had died violently or under mysterious circumstances. One such tale was of a lord who had fallen in love with a beautiful woman of the village, only to lose her to an untimely death. Consumed by grief, he wandered the halls of his castle at night, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, and his voice, low and mournful, was said to call out for her in the stillness of the evening. Some said the lord never truly died, but continued to roam the castle searching for the love he had lost, his ghost forever trapped in the space between the living and the dead. These ghosts were not to be feared in the way one might fear a wild animal or a monstrous creature. Instead, they were seen as part of the landscape, a kind of natural element that coexisted with the living. The people of Transylvania, while wary of these spirits, also had a deep respect for them. The presence of the dead, the villagers believed, was a reminder of the connection between all things, life, death, and the land itself. And in the tavern, where the boundaries between these worlds seemed thin, stories of these spirits were told with reverence and wonder. Yet not all spirits were so benign.
There were tales of creatures far darker, more sinister, that haunted the hills and forests of Transylvania.
These were the stories that sent a chill through the bones and made even the bravest men pause before venturing out after dark. Tales of the strigo, the restless undead who returned from the grave to feed on the blood of the living, were common among the people. Unlike the ghosts, the strigo were not content to simply wander in the shadows. They were said to be powerful, malevolent entities capable of causing illness, death, and misfortune to those they targeted. The legends of the strigoi were as old as the land itself, passed down through generations with a kind of solemn certainty. It was said that those who were cursed to become strigoi would rise from their graves at night, their pale, lifeless bodies feeding on the blood of the living in an unending thirst. Sometimes the stories told of these creatures were more grounded, speaking of people who had been seen walking at night, their eyes hollow and their skin ashen, while others were more supernatural in nature, describing entire villages plagued by a strigoi's curse, with people falling ill or disappearing without a trace. In these taverns, the stories of strigoi were shared over wine and beer, their eerie details lingering in the air as the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. Sometimes, a group of travelers would arrive at a tavern in the dead of night, pale and shaken, speaking in hushed tones of a strigoi they had seen, or a village that had been struck by its curse. The locals, though they had heard these stories many times, would listen with rapt attention, never quite sure whether they were hearing the truth or simply the effects of an overactive imagination. After all, in a place like Transylvania, where the forests were thick with ancient trees and the mountains seemed to loom like sleeping giants, who was to say what might be lurking in the shadows? Yet, the taverns of Transylvania were not merely a place for ghost stories and legends of the undead. They were also places where the living could confront the darker aspects of their world, their own fears, and the uncertainties that came with living in a land so full of mystery. In these taverns, a man might speak of a lost love or a missed opportunity. A woman might share a tale of hardship and endurance, and families would gather to recount the stories of their ancestors. Those who had fought in wars, endured hardships, or had vanished mysteriously from the village. The tavern was a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the past and the present, were always blurred. The fireside stories might have spoken of things that were no longer present in the world, but the emotions and connections they stirred were timeless. In the flickering light of the tavern fire, the stories became something more than mere entertainment. They were the very fabric of the community's identity, passed from one generation to the next, keeping the history and spirit of Transylvania alive. These legends, though sometimes frightening, also served as a reminder of the land's deep, ancient power, a power that had been shaped by centuries of struggle, survival, and supernatural intrigue. As the night wore on and the fire burned low, the stories would grow quieter, more contemplative. The patrons of the tavern, their voices hushed, would lean in closer, as if to catch a final whispered secret of the night. And then, with the first rays of dawn creeping over the mountains, the tavern would fall silent, the stories lingering in the air like smoke, ever present, but just beyond reach. As the stories continued to echo in the air, one figure remained ever present in the tavern keeper, often a quiet, watchful soul. The keeper was both the guardian of the fire and the keeper of all the secrets shared under its light. While the patrons might be the ones telling the stories, it was the tavern keeper who had heard them all, over and over again, year after year, century after century. It was said that a good tavern keeper could tell as many stories as they had served drinks, and some of the most famous tales of Transylvania's supernatural world came not from the mouths of villagers, but from those who had been listening long enough to understand the rhythms of the night. The tavern keeper was no simple innkeeper. They were often seen as a kind of local historian, a living archive of the community's collective memory. They knew who had disappeared into the woods and who had returned with strange tales to tell. They knew the names of the ancestors, whose ghosts still roamed the land, and they knew which families had been touched by tragedy. A good tavern keeper could tell the difference between a drunken ramble and a tale grounded in truth, though both were equally valuable in the world of Transylvanian folklore. In these small, humble taverns, the keeper's role was far more significant than simply pouring drinks or keeping the fire stoked. They were the ones who shaped the atmosphere, who ensured that the sacred space between the living and the dead was respected, and who were often the first to hear about any strange happenings in the surrounding countryside. For a tavern keeper, nothing was ever truly ordinary. Each visitor, each tale, each laugh or scream told a story that might just become part of the larger narrative of Transylvania's rich tapestry of legend. But being a tavern keeper in Transylvania was not without its burdens. The job often required long hours, and the pressure to maintain the tavern's reputation as a place of warmth and comfort could weigh heavily on even the strongest souls. Yet, Those who took up the mantle seemed to do so with an understanding that their work was part of something larger. They weren't just feeding and serving travelers. They were preserving a living history. Some even believed that the tavern itself had a certain spirit, a presence that imbued the space with its own energy, an energy that the tavern keeper could feel and guide. The most well-known tavern keepers in Transylvania were those who ran the establishments near the castles, reminders of a bygone era of feudal lords, battles, and shifting allegiances. These taverns were often housed in ancient stone buildings, with thick walls and narrow, winding staircases. Many had been around for centuries, their foundations intertwined with the history of the land. These keepers were steeped in local lore, knowing that the very land beneath their feet had once been the battleground for wars and dark rituals. To be a keeper in these regions was to be a part of a lineage that connected the present to the past, a link between the living world and the ancient, mysterious forces that still held sway over the land. It wasn't uncommon for travelers to arrive at these remote taverns, seeking refuge from the cold and the dark, only to be met by the knowing eyes of the tavern keeper. These keepers were often seen as wise, if not a bit mysterious. Their eyes had seen things that were often too strange or too unsettling to be fully understood. A well-timed glance, a pause in conversation, a soft chuckle after a particularly eerie tale. These were the moments when the tavern keeper seemed to communicate volumes without saying a word. Those who were perceptive enough could sense that there was more to the keeper than met the eye. Perhaps they knew more than they let on. Perhaps they had encountered the supernatural forces that haunted the hills. After all, in a land so full of mystery, it was easy to imagine that even the keepers were not immune to the things that crept in the darkness. In many of the taverns, particularly those near the famed castles of Transylvania, the walls were adorned with paintings, portraits, and maps that depicted the legendary figures who had once walked the land, the faces of the long-dead lords, soldiers, and heroes stared down at the guests, their eyes forever fixed in a kind of eternal watchfulness. The tavern keeper was often the one who could explain the significance of these portraits, recounting the legends that surrounded them. It was common for guests to inquire about the painted figures, and more than once the keeper would tell stories of their exploits. They might speak of Vlad the Impaler, the infamous ruler whose cruelty and dark legacy had inspired legends of vampires, or of the noble families whose bloodlines had been intertwined with both tragedy and triumph. The tavern keeper, however, was often careful with their words. The stories were always tinged with mystery, and no one was ever quite sure where the truth ended and the legend began. After all, in a place like Transylvania, truth itself could sometimes seem like just another layer of myth. The tavern keeper's subtle art was in knowing how to balance the stories, the ones that were meant to entertain, the ones that were meant to warn, and the ones that were so deeply woven into the land's fabric that they could never be fully separated from the truth. In some of the older taverns, particularly those hidden in remote valleys or nestled beneath towering castles, the keeper's role went beyond storytelling. There were rumors of ancient rites performed in secret, rituals carried out under the cover of night. The tavern, after all, was often seen as a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was the thinnest. Whether through intentional ceremonies or the mere act of sharing an evening of tales, the tavern became a space where the past and the present merged, a place where the air itself seemed charged with something unseen. Tavern keepers in these areas were sometimes regarded as the protectors of these ancient rites, preserving the spirit of Transylvania's mysterious past while keeping it alive in the stories shared by the firelight. As the evening wore on and the fire began to dim, the tavern keeper would quietly move about, ensuring that the patrons were comfortable and that the shadows didn't grow too long. Though their job was one of service, it was clear that they were more than just hosts. They were the silent custodians of the tavern's history, the ones who held the keys to the land's deepest secrets. In the stillness of the night, when the stories began to fade and the last drink was poured, the tavern keeper would remain, alone with the fire, knowing that the tales of the evening would soon be passed on, and that, in time, they too would become part of the ever-growing legend of Transylvania. The fire's glow began to wane, and the night outside grew colder. But inside the tavern, the warmth lingered. As the embers of the fire flickered, the stories of the evening hung in the air like an invisible fog, clinging to the room, to the walls, to the very floorboards. These stories, though shared countless times over the years, never grew stale. In fact, they seemed to take on a new life each time they were retold, as if the very act of telling them breathed new energy into the tales of Transylvania's mysterious past. The legends, it seemed, were not just bound by time. They transcended it. They lived on, echoing through the taverns, through the people who told them, and through the land that had birthed them. This was the true power of the taverns of Transylvania. They were not simply places to gather and drink. They were the keepers of memory, the holders of the past. Each story, each whispered tale shared in the dim light of the fire, was a thread in the ever-widening tapestry of the region's history. As one generation of villagers left, the next took their place, but the legends stayed, woven into the very fabric of the community. Some of the older villagers, the ones who had been born and raised in the shadow of the castles, knew that these legends were more than just stories. They were warnings, reminders of the land's power and its ability to shape the fates of those who lived there. The same hills that had witnessed the battles of kings and lords, the same forests that had concealed armies and secrets, still held the echoes of those past events. The taverns, therefore, weren't just refuges from the outside world. They were places where the people could connect with that power, where the stories of the past could be heard and felt in the present. These tales, passed down over centuries, were never just a form of entertainment. They were an essential part of Transylvanian identity. Each story carried with it a piece of the region's history, its struggles, its triumphs, and its darker, more unsettling elements. The villagers had a deep understanding that the stories, though often filled with fantastical creatures and supernatural occurrences, were grounded in the truths of their ancestors' lives. Whether it was a tale of a cursed castle or a mysterious creature in the forest, the legends reflected the fears, hopes, and dreams of those who had come before them. In some ways, the tavern keeper was the living embodiment of this unbroken chain. While the patrons came and went, each adding their own voice to the chorus of legends, it was the keeper who remained constant. Over the years, they became a part of the fabric of the tavern, a quiet witness to the passing of time and to the constant flow of stories. It was said that a good tavern keeper could remember every tale that had ever been told, every face that had ever sat by the fire. Their knowledge of the legends was so vast, so deep, that it seemed as if the tavern itself was alive, breathing in the history of the region with every passing day. But what made the taverns truly special, what made them more than just places of warmth and respite, was the way in which they kept the legends alive. The tavern was a sanctuary where time seemed to bend, where the old world and the new world coexisted side by side. The modern travelers who stumbled in from the cold, looking for a drink and a bed, were unknowingly participating in a centuries-old tradition. They would sit by the fire, perhaps unaware of the significance of their presence, but they were becoming part of the ever-growing cycle of storytelling that had been happening in these same taverns for generations. Sometimes, a newcomer would enter the tavern, someone unfamiliar with the legends, with the long shadow of history that hung over the region. They would listen, wide-eyed and eager, as the older villagers recounted tales of strickery, of vanished lords, and of spirits that roamed the land. Over time, these newcomers, too, would become part of the story. The next time they visited, they would speak with a certain familiarity, as if they had known the tales all along. The legends didn't just stay in the past, they were alive, passed from one person to another, each time evolving, each time growing, as the new voices added their own experiences and interpretations. And so, the cycle continued. The old stories once told in hushed tones by firelight would eventually be passed on to the next generation. It was said that if you visited a tavern long enough, you would begin to feel as though you were part of the land itself, that you were somehow connected to the people and events that had come before you. These taverns were more than just places to drink and rest. They were the keepers of memory, the protectors of the stories that gave shape to Transylvania's identity. In the cold and quiet of the night, when the fire had almost burned down to embers, the tavern keeper would often stand, silently gazing at the dying flames. For them, the stories were not just tales of the past, they were a living part of their present. The keeper's work was never done. It was a quiet, sacred responsibility to keep the fire burning, to ensure that the stories of the land were never forgotten. As long as the fire remained lit, as long as the tavern stayed open, the legends would continue to live on. And so the tavern keeper would step back into the shadows, letting the firelight flicker one last time before the night fully descended, knowing that the stories of Transylvania would keep on echoing, ever present, forever alive. As the fire's embers dimmed and the tavern's patrons dwindled into quiet murmurs, a new kind of life would often enter the scene. The wanderers, these travelers coming from lands beyond Transylvania's borders, brought with them their own tales, while the locals shared stories tied deeply to the land. The wanderers introduced foreign legends, adding a layer of complexity to the rich tapestry of Transylvanian folklore. Their arrival often marked the beginning of a new chapter in the tavern's evening, a chapter filled with strange stories, eerie anecdotes, and sometimes unsettling truth. The wanderers' tales were always met with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. These travelers, often wrapped in heavy cloaks to protect them from the harsh mountain winds, would sit down at the long wooden tables, ordering food and drink before launching into stories of their own. They might speak of lands far beyond the Carpathian mountains, of cities where the lights never went out, or of places where creatures of myth had been seen by many. These stories were often hard for the local villagers to believe. After all, how could something so fantastical be true? But as the firelight flickered and the night deepened, even the most skeptical among the villagers found themselves listening intently. Some of the wanderers' stories carried with them a sense of unease, as if their very presence in the tavern was tied to something darker. There were whispers of travelers who had ventured into the deep forests, never to return to their families. Desperate for answers, would eventually hear rumors from those who had crossed the same paths. Tales of strange noises, of figures that moved in the dark, and of eyes that watched from the shadows of the trees. The wanderers would speak in hushed tones of these encounters, their voices trembling slightly, as if they were still haunted by what they had seen. These stories were always met with quiet apprehension, especially from those who knew the land well. For in Transylvania, the woods were not like the woods of other places. They were ancient, dark, and thick with secret. The trees were said to be alive with the whispers of spirits who had once walked the earth. And it was in these very forests, according to the wanderers, that something dark lingered, something that could never be fully understood. The villagers, though they may not have fully believed these tales, knew better than to dismiss them entirely. After all, in a place like Transylvania, where every rock, every tree, every patch of earth had been touched by the supernatural, it was always better to listen closely. As the evening wore on, and the warmth of the tavern grew more intimate, the wanderers would often begin to share more personal stories, tales of strange dreams, of encounters with figures cloaked in shadow, or of unexplained visions that seemed to defy logic. One such wanderer, an older man with a weathered face and a long white beard, would tell of a journey he had taken across the mountains to a village that no longer existed, or so he had thought. He had arrived to find an eerie quiet, the houses empty and abandoned, as if the entire village had simply vanished. Yet, as the man walked deeper into the village, he swore he saw the figures of people moving in the windows of the empty houses, their faces obscured by the curtains. When he knocked on the doors, there was no answer, but the figures in the windows remained staring back at him. The man spoke of the feeling of being watched, of the unsettling silence that seemed to engulf the village. The villagers, who were listening intently to this tale, shivered at the thought. It was a story they had heard before, stories of villagers hidden away in the mountains, places where the living and the dead existed, side by side. Some believed that these were simply tales designed to keep people from venturing too far into the wilds of Transylvania, but others were not so sure. After all, what better place to hide a dark secret than in a village that appeared to be abandoned, a place where only shadows remained? As the night deepened, the tavern became a space where the stories of both the locals and the wanderers intermingled. The tales of the Strigor, those restless, undead souls, were joined by accounts of other supernatural beings, some familiar and some strange. A wanderer from Hungary might speak of creatures known as the Fikitai Kucha, a large black dog that was said to follow travelers at night, its eyes glowing in the dark. The locals would nod thoughtfully, adding their own experiences of similar creatures in the forests of Transylvania, wolves with eyes that burned like embers, shadows that seemed to move against the wind. It was during these moments, when the stories of the locals and the wanderers merged, that the tavern seemed to take on a life of its own. The air grew thicker, the fire crackled louder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to lengthen. The villagers, though well accustomed to their own legends, would listen with rapt attention, drawn into the tales from distant lands. These stories were not just an escape from the mundane, but a connection to something larger, a shared understanding that the world was full of mystery, that the boundaries between the living and the dead, the natural and the supernatural, were often more porous than they seemed. For the wanderers, the tavern was not just a place to rest. It was a place where their experiences were validated, where they could find others who had seen the same strange things, who had heard the same unsettling noises in the forest. They could share their fears without being judged, knowing that in this place, in the shadow of the Carpathians, their stories would be heard. And for the locals, the wanderers' tales added a new layer of intrigue to their already rich folklore. The legends of Transylvania, it seemed, were never truly static. They were always evolving, always adapting to the stories of those who passed through. In the tavern, with its low beams and stone walls, the boundary between worlds was always thin. The stories, old and new, wove together in a never-ending dance, keeping the legends alive, passing them from one generation to the next, one traveler to the next. The fire would eventually die down, but the stories, like the spirits of the land, would linger long after the tavern's door was shut for the night. As the last of the travelers would drift off to their rooms for the night, and the villagers returned to their homes, the tavern would grow quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wood and the soft crackling of the fading fire. But in that silence, something else seemed to stir. A kind of unease, a feeling that the legends shared over the evening were more than just stories. In Transylvania, the line between the supernatural and the natural world often blurred, and as the tavern keeper began to close the doors and lock the windows, they knew better than to dismiss the whispers that lingered in the corners of the room. It was after midnight that the true weight of the legends seemed to fall upon the tavern. Those who stayed behind, either because they had wandered too far into the night or because they were waiting for a moment of clarity, would often feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavier, colder, as if the ancient stories that filled the tavern had started to bleed into reality. It was as though, with the coming of night, the tavern itself became a threshold, a crossing point between the living world and the other, where shadows whispered and things that had no business being in the daylight found their way into the firelight. On those rare, quiet nights when the last drink had been poured and the laughter of the tavern's guests had faded into the distance, the keeper would sometimes notice strange, inexplicable things. A gust of wind that carried the scent of the forest, thick with pine and damp earth, despite the windows being firmly shut. The flickering of the fire in odd patterns, as though it were struggling to remain alight. The sound of footsteps in the tavern, light but steady, echoing where no one had walked. These weren't the tricks of a tired mind, but something else, something far older and more persistent. Sometimes, in the stillness of the empty tavern, the keeper would hear the faintest whisper of voices, soft, almost imperceptible at first, but growing clearer as the minutes passed. It was as though the stories told throughout the evening hadn't yet finished their telling. They hung in the air, clinging to the walls, woven into the very fabric of the tavern's stones. The keeper knew that these whispers were not the echoes of the patrons. They were the voices of those who had gone before, the dead who had walked these very floors, telling their tales once more. In a place as steeped in legend as Transylvania, the tavern could never truly be free of the past. The stories once shared by firelight took on a life of their own when the tavern emptied. The spirits of the land were always watching, always listening, and sometimes they could not resist stepping closer. The tavern keeper would often find themselves standing in the dimly lit room, quietly waiting for the soft sound of footsteps to fade, or for the chill to leave the air. They knew better than to speak out loud, to acknowledge the presence of the unseen, for there were some things in Transylvania that were best left undisturbed. It was during these long, quiet hours that the true weight of Transylvania's legends became apparent. The strigoi, the vampires, and the restless spirits. These beings were not confined to the pages of old books or the mouths of drunken villagers. They existed in the land itself, woven into the history, the hills, the very stones of the taverns. The keeper had long understood this truth, that the stories weren't just stories, and the past was never truly gone. It was always lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to return. Some of the more superstitious villagers would avoid the tavern on certain nights, when the moon was full or when the winds blew with an eerie howl through the mountains. They knew that during these times, the veil between the worlds was thinner, and the chances of encountering something from beyond the grave were greater. The tavern, standing at the crossroads of so much history, was always a focal point for the supernatural. It had witnessed battles, betrayals, and dark rituals throughout the centuries, and as a result, it was often said to be touched by the forces that had shaped Transylvania. On one particularly stormy night, a local fisherman had ventured into the tavern after a long day on the river. He had heard the stories about the ancient lords and the strigoi that haunted the hills, and he had never given them much thought. After all, He was a practical man, a man of the water, accustomed to the sound of the river and the pull of the current. But this night was different. The storm that raged outside seemed to carry with it an unsettling energy, as if the land itself were in turmoil. The fisherman, weary from the long hours spent in the cold, found himself sitting alone at a table, nursing his drink. As he sipped, he thought he heard the sound of soft footsteps, followed by a whisper, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere. The voice was faint, but it was unmistakable, calling his name. At first he thought it was just the wind, or the effects of too much drink, but when the whisper came again, this time closer, his blood ran cold. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor, but there was no one to be seen. The tavern keeper, who had been cleaning up, glanced over at the fisherman, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. The keeper nodded, as if acknowledging that this was not the first time such a thing had happened. Later, the fisherman would tell anyone who would listen that he had heard the voice of an old, long-dead lord calling to him from the shadows, warning him of something, though he could never quite remember what. All he knew was that when he left the tavern that night, the storm had grown worse, and the air felt colder, heavier. As he crossed the river on his way home, he swore he saw a figure standing in the mist, tall, pale, and unmistakably not human. He turned his boat around, eager to return to the safety of the village, and vowed never to return to that tavern again. Such stories, strange and unnerving as they were a part of the fabric of life in Transylvania. They were a reminder that even in the quietest moments, the supernatural was never far away. In the dead of night, when the fire had burned low and the tavern was empty, the legends of Transylvania were alive, walking between the shadows, just waiting to be heard again. As the final embers of the fire crackled and the tavern doors creaked shut for the night, the town outside fell into a quiet slumber. Yet the land of Transylvania was never truly still. In the stillness of the valley, beneath the looming, snow-capped peaks, there was a presence, a power that lay hidden in the earth itself, a force born from centuries of bloodshed, betrayal, and forgotten pacts. The legends of the Strigoi and vampires were only the beginning. The true curse of Transylvania lay not in creatures of the night, but in the land that had witnessed the rise and fall of mighty rulers, the struggles of kingdoms, and the dark rituals whispered about in tavern corners. For centuries, the nobility of Transylvania had ruled with an iron fist. Castles dotted the landscape, perched high on jagged cliffs or nestled deep within the forest, their stone walls weathered by time, but strong enough to stand as a reminder of the power once held within them. These castles, however, were more than just fortresses of defense. They were strongholds of power, steeped in ancient traditions and dark secrets. The lords who inhabited them were known for their cruelty, for their ambition, and in some cases, for their connection to forces that were anything but human. Perhaps the most notorious figure in the region's history was Vlad the Impaler, the infamous ruler who inspired the legend of Dracula. His castle, the Castle of Bran, still looms over the Carpathian Mountains, a symbol of the bloodshed and terror that defined his reign. Though Vlad himself was long gone, the stories of his cruelty continued to haunt the land. His methods of maintaining control were savage, impaling his enemies on long wooden stakes, leaving their bodies to rot in the open air as a warning to others. But it wasn't just his bloodlust that made him a figure of fear. It was the rumors that surrounded him, rumors of his involvement in darker, more sinister practices. Some believed that Vlad had made a pact with supernatural forces, that he had called upon demons, or even the spirits of the dead, to help him retain power. There were whispers of rituals performed in the dead of night, of sacrifices made to entities whose names were never spoken aloud. Though much of this was never confirmed, the fear that gripped Transylvania in the wake of Vlad's reign still lingered. Many believed that his bloodline carried with it a curse, one that bound the family to the land and to the shadows that lingered just beyond the veil of reality. But Vlad's story was only one thread in the tapestry of Transylvanian darkness. The land itself, it was said, had been cursed long before Vlad's reign, its soil soaked with the blood of ancient wars and betrayals. Long before the castles and the lords, the land had been home to older, more primal forces. These forces, some claimed, were the spirits of the earth itself, ancient entities that had been worshipped and feared by the earliest settlers of the region. Over the centuries, these spirits had been forgotten by most, but some of the old families of Transylvania still honored them, paying respect to the forces that had shaped the land long before the rise of Christianity. The villagers who lived in the shadow of the great castles knew of these ancient powers. They had grown up with stories of the Zana, the mysterious forest spirits that could either bless a family with good fortune or curse them with misfortune, depending on their respect for the land. It was said that if a family failed to honor the old ways, if they grew greedy or disrespectful, the Zana would bring misfortune upon them, leading to death, illness, or madness. Even in the modern age, the elders of the villages would whisper about the old ways, reminding their children to respect the earth, to never cut down a tree without asking for permission, to never disturb the spirits that inhabited the forests and mountains. But it was not just the ancient spirits that haunted Transylvania. There were darker, more malevolent forces as well. Over the centuries, the land had been the site of numerous battles, wars fought between kingdoms, religious crusades, and civil strife. The scars of these conflicts ran deep, and many believed that the souls of those who died in these wars had not found peace. The restless spirits of soldiers and innocents who had perished in the bloodshed were said to wander the land seeking vengeance for their untimely deaths. Some claimed to have seen them, figures draped in tattered armor, their faces twisted in anguish, moving through the mist-covered forests at night. One such tale was passed down through generations of a soldier who had fought in the wars of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. After the battle, he had returned home, only to be haunted by the ghost of a fellow soldier he had killed in combat. The spirit would appear at night, sitting at the foot of his bed, staring at him with hollow eyes. The soldier's life slowly unraveled as the ghost's presence grew stronger, until he finally succumbed to madness, convinced that the spirit would never leave him. It was said that he died a broken man, but some swore that his soul was still trapped in the land, forever cursed to walk among the living, bound to the place of his death. These stories, though often spoken in hushed tones, were never fully forgotten. The land of Transylvania had a way of remembering, of holding on to the past, even when the present sought to forget. The taverns of the region, with their ancient walls and flickering fires, were repositories of these stories, silent witnesses to the darkness that had shaped the land and its people. Even as Transylvania began to embrace the modern world, even as the castles fell into ruins and the legends of old became the stuff of fairy tales, there was always something lurking just beneath the surface. The curse of the land, the bloodshed, the ancient spirits, the restless souls could never be fully erased. It lived on in the whispers of the villagers, in the stories told by the firelight, and in the very stones of the taverns themselves. And so, as the tavern keeper closed the doors for the night, and the last travelers made their way out into the moonlit streets, they knew that the legends would continue. The curse of the land, bound in blood and shadow, would never truly be lifted. It would endure, always, quietly waiting for the next story to be told. The fire now reduced glowing embers. The tavern would fall into its final silence for the night. leaving only the echoes of past conversations hanging in the air. Outside, the cold Transylvanian night stretched across the land, wrapping the villages in its heavy, ancient embrace. The shadows cast by the surrounding mountains seemed to grow longer with every passing hour, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for the dawn that would never quite erase the mysteries it carried. Transylvania's legacy, built upon centuries of war, dark rituals, and the silent march of time, remained, unseen but undeniable. The tales shared around the tavern's firesides weren't mere relics of superstition. They were a testament to the land's power to shape not just the people, but the very air they breathed. The spirits of Transylvania, whether real or imagined, continued to haunt the land, their presence lingering just beneath the surface. The villagers who lived there knew that no matter how far the world outside advanced, their land would always carry the weight of the past. And so, the tavern keeper would lock the door and turn away from the fading warmth of the hearth, moving toward the small, narrow staircase that led to the rooms above. But before they disappeared into the solitude of the upper floors, they would pause for a moment, glancing over the dark, empty tavern. The shadows danced across the walls, casting long, ominous figures in the corners of the room. The keeper's gaze lingered on the wooden beams that had witnessed centuries of stories, each one as vivid and real as the night they were told. It wasn't just the stories of the living that clung to these walls. There were whispers, too, of the dead. They were always with the tavern, woven into its very foundation. As the keeper walked up the stairs, a distant echo of footsteps followed, too soft to be heard by any who did not know the language of the land, too familiar for anyone who had lived in the tavern long enough to ignore. It was the feeling of the past pressing against the present, a constant, unbroken thread of history, reaching out with invisible hands to hold its place in the world. The tavern was never truly empty. It was a space where the past and the present collided, where the air hummed with the weight of unspoken truths and unacknowledged legends. The villagers who gathered around the fires had long ago accepted that the supernatural was not something to be feared, but something to be understood. In Transylvania, the line between the living and the dead, the real and the imagined, had always been blurry, and as the last echoes of the evening's tales faded into the night, the keeper knew that it would be the same again tomorrow. The next group of travelers would arrive, curious and seeking respite, and the next story would be told. The tavern, ancient and steeped in mystery, would stand for another night as a witness to the unfolding legend. The stories would keep coming, passed from one generation to the next, each tale adding to the shadowy layers of history that clung to the land. The Strigoi, the vampires, the spirits of long-dead lords, and the creatures that walked in the night, they would all remain. And though the world around Transylvania might change, the legends would stay the same, always evolving, always alive. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind rustled through the trees and the sky began to lighten, the tavern keeper would lie awake, listening to the stories that never truly ended. The spirits of Transylvania were patient. They had been waiting for centuries. After all, they had time, the land had time. And as the tavern keeper drifted into a light sleep, the final thoughts that passed through their mind were always the same. The legends were not just stories, they were an inescapable part of the land, and the land would never forget. With each new dawn, the cycle would continue. The tavern would open again, the fire would be stoked, and the legends would be told once more. In Transylvania, the past would never be allowed to fade into the dark, would remain alive in the stories of the night, carried by the very people who lived within the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains. And so, the legacy of the Taverns of Transylvania, steeped in both the past and the present, would endure as timeless and mysterious as the land itself. The curtain may fall for one act, but the stage is never empty for long. The lights shift, the air stirs, and a new scene emerges with more mystery than the last. This is the silent lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands, guardians of the sea. The rugged, wild coast of the Scottish Highlands is a place where the land meets the sea in ways that are both beautiful and brutal. The wind howls across the cliffs, and the waves crash against the jagged rocks, relentless and eternal. It's a landscape steeped in history and mystery, where the forces of nature seem to rule with unyielding power. Yet, amidst this raw beauty, there stands a symbol of human perseverance and ingenuity. The lighthouse. The lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands are solitary sentinels, standing guard over the treacherous waters that have claimed so many ships and lives. They are beacons in the dark, their steady light cutting through the thick fog that often blankets the coast, guiding sailors safely to shore. These structures, though built with the most practical of purposes, have always had an air of mystique about them. There's something otherworldly about the way they rise from the cliffs, their tall white towers piercing the sky like ancient watchtowers. In the midst of the untamed wilderness, they stand as symbols of stability, offering light in the face of an otherwise unforgiving world. To understand the role these lighthouses have played in the Highlands, one must first appreciate the region's relationship with the sea. The coastline is filled with deep inlets and rugged coves, where storms can blow in unexpectedly, and without warning, the waters are home to powerful currents, rocks just beneath the surface, and unpredictable tides. It's a dangerous place to navigate, and for centuries, sailors relied on the stars, the sun, and landmarks to guide them, until the lighthouses began to dot the coastline. In the early days, before the advent of modern navigation, these lighthouses were critical to ensuring the safety of those who ventured into the waters. They provided a crucial point of reference for sailors, a fixed and reliable marker in a sea of uncertainty. And while they served a practical function, there was always something poetic about them, standing alone on a cliff, often miles from the nearest settlement. They seemed to symbolize the balance between humanity and nature, man's attempt to impose order on the chaos of the natural world. The first lighthouses in Scotland were established in the late 18th century, following a series of shipwrecks that had caused a public outcry. The Scottish people, particularly those in the coastal communities, had long recognized the need for lighthouses to guide ships safely into port. The idea of building such a structure was not a new one, but it took the influence of men like Robert Stephenson, a pioneering engineer, to bring the concept to fruition. Stephenson's designs were innovative and practical, and they paved the way for the construction of many of the lighthouses that still stand today. One of the most famous of these early lighthouses is the Bell Rock Lighthouse, located off the coast of Angus. Built between 1807 and 1811, it stands on a submerged reef, making it one of the most challenging lighthouse projects ever undertaken. The Bell Rock was, and still is, a testament to the bravery and skill of those who built it. Even today, it remains an enduring symbol of the lighthouse's role in safeguarding sailors. It was the first lighthouse to be built on a submerged reef, and its design has influenced countless others that followed. The Scottish Highlands are home to some of the most isolated and picturesque lighthouses in the world. These lighthouses, built from stone and standing tall against the elements, have long been a point of fascination for those who have lived by the sea. The isolation of these lighthouses often meant that the keepers and their families were cut off from the rest of society, living in near complete solitude. The harshness of the environment and the demands of the job created a way of life that was as lonely as it was essential. Imagine being a lighthouse keeper in the Highlands, a job that required a certain type of person, someone who could withstand the isolation, the fierce weather, and the constant vigilance required to maintain the light. The work was physically demanding and emotionally taxing. Keepers lived in small, often cramped quarters, separated from the nearest village or town by miles of wild terrain. Their days were spent tending to the light, checking the mechanisms, and ensuring the lens was clean. During storms, they would remain on duty, keeping the light burning bright through the night, knowing that their only function was to guide others safely through the storm. In many ways, the lighthouse keeper's life mirrored the life of the sea itself, lonely, unpredictable, and dangerous. And yet, it was a life that many embraced. The role of the keeper was a deeply respected one, and those who took on the job did so with a sense of pride and purpose. They were the silent guardians of the sea, watching over the waters and ensuring that ships and sailors made it safely to port. As the years passed and technology advanced, the role of the lighthouse keeper began to change. The advent of automated lighting systems and radar meant that the need for human keepers began to wane. Many of the lighthouses that once relied on a dedicated staff of keepers now stand empty, their lights maintained by machinery rather than by human hands. The lighthouses, however, remain silent and steadfast, reminders of a time when the Highlands were ruled by the rhythm of the sea. Even in the absence of their keepers, the lighthouses continue to shine their light into the night, a steady presence in an ever-changing world. Their beacons, though no longer tended by human hands, still hold the same symbolic power they did centuries ago. They stand as guardians of the sea, not just for sailors, but for all who live in the shadow of the Highlands. The lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands are more than just structures of stone and glass. They are living symbols of resilience, of solitude, and of the enduring relationship between mankind and the unpredictable forces of nature. The lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands, with their towering white facades and rotating beams of light, were never mere structures of stone and glass. They were sanctuaries for those who lived within their walls, where lighthouse keepers and their families carried out lives of duty, isolation, and quiet resilience. The keepers, often viewed as the silent sentinels of the sea, were not only the guardians of the light, but also the bridge between the human world and the vast, unforgiving ocean. Imagine the life of a lighthouse keeper. The day began long before dawn, with the keeper rising to inspect the light, checking the intricate mechanisms that kept the beam turning hour after hour. It was a job that demanded constant vigilance, as the light had to be tended to even in the most severe of weather. On stormy nights, when the sea raged and the wind howled, the keeper would be the one to ensure that the light never went out, a small but vital point of stability in the chaotic world of the sea. The light was a lifeline, a promise that someone, somewhere, was watching over the waters. Life on the lighthouse station, tucked away on a craggy cliff or perched on a solitary island, was not for the faint of heart. The isolation was overwhelming, especially in the winter months, when the storms came in quick succession, cutting off access to the mainland for days or even weeks at a time. There was little to do except maintain the light, repair the equipment, and keep watch for ships. The keeper's family, if they lived with him, would often be as cut off as the keeper himself, living in small, modest cottages nearby or within the lighthouse tower. The solitude of the keeper's life was both a blessing and a curse. For some, the quiet of the lighthouse was a welcome refuge, far removed from the noise and bustle of the world. But for others, the isolation became unbearable. There were no neighbors to chat with, no village market to visit, no familiar faces to greet. The keeper's family would live in a world entirely apart from the rest of society, their days shaped by the rhythm of the tides and the weather. In many ways, life on a lighthouse station was a test of endurance. The families of lighthouse keepers had to make do with the most basic of amenities. Supplies were brought in only sporadically, and the keepers' families had to rely on their own resourcefulness. There was no running water, no electricity, no telephones. Everything had to be done by hand. The keeper's wife would often be responsible for preparing meals with whatever food had been brought in, while the children, if there were any, would grow up in the shadow of the light, with the sea their constant companion. Though life could be lonely, it was also filled with moments of quiet beauty. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below, the endless horizon stretching out before them, and the sight of the light casting its beam across the dark, endless waters were all a part of daily life. The keeper's family became attuned to the rhythms of the sea, learning to read the weather patterns, the behavior of the tide, and the changing light of the sky. These were the things that defined their world, the things that kept them grounded in a place that seemed at times as though it existed outside of time. But the sea was not always a threat. There were times when the lighthouse stood as a symbol of hope, its steady light offering comfort to those who relied on it. In a world where the sea could be both a source of livelihood and a constant threat, the lighthouse was a promise. The keeper's light offered sailors a chance, a guide that could lead them safely through stormy waters and into the arms of the shore. It was a delicate balance of life and death, where the flicker of the lamp could mean the difference between safe passage or a shipwreck on the jagged rocks below. Over the years, the role of the lighthouse keeper began to change. As technology advanced, the need for human keepers started to fade. Automated lighting systems and radar technology made the traditional role of the keeper obsolete. The lighthouses, once manned by those who lived and breathed the sea, were left to stand empty, their lights still shining, but no longer tended by human hands. The keepers' families, who had once lived in isolation, found themselves slowly fading into the background of history. The lighthouses became automated, their machinery whirring silently, without the human touch that had once kept them alive. Some of the lighthouses were abandoned entirely, while others continued to operate under the watchful eyes of remote technicians. The keepers, who had once been the living embodiment of the lighthouse, became little more than a memory. Even as the lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands continued to stand guard, their beams cutting through the dark night, the lore surrounding these towering sentinels evolved. The isolation of these lighthouses, perched atop the cliffs or situated on remote islands, became the foundation for a new kind of legend. These legends, born from the lives of the keepers and the tumultuous seas they battled, would take on lives of their own, stories whispered among the locals, shared in quiet corners of the taverns, and passed down through generations. The most enduring of these legends were those of the ghosts, spirits said to inhabit the lighthouses themselves, guardians of the light even after death. It was said that the sea itself was home to spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, who would sometimes choose a lighthouse as their final resting place. The lighthouses, so tightly bound to the sea, became more than just beacons of light. They were bridges between the living and the dead, markers for those who had been claimed by the relentless waves or lost in the storm. Other stories speak of the sea itself as a kind of living entity, one that watches over the lighthouses with a protective, if eerie eye. The waters off the coast of Scotland are as unpredictable as they are powerful. At night, when the lighthouse beam slices through the fog, some sailors claim to have seen the waters stir in strange ways, as if something beneath the surface was watching, waiting. There's an old saying among the fishermen of the Highlands: the sea is never silent, only waiting. It's a sentiment that reflects the unpredictable nature of the waters surrounding the lighthouses, how they can turn from calm to violent in an instant, claiming ships and men with no warning. There are tales of ships that have disappeared near certain lighthouses, their crew never found, their wrecks never recovered. Some of these disappearances are attributed to the sea itself, a mysterious force that sometimes refuses to let go of its prey. The most chilling stories, however, are the ones that suggest the sea claims not just the living, but the dead as well. It is said that the spirits of drowned sailors, those who have met their end in the cold waters of the Highlands, are drawn to the lighthouses seeking shelter or a final resting place. These spirits, never at peace, are believed to inhabit the lighthouses, their presence felt by the few brave souls who venture close enough. And yet, for all the tales of ghosts and spirits, the lighthouses are not only places of darkness and fear, they are also symbols of resilience and hope, their lights cutting through the fog and darkness to guide those who navigate the perilous seas. Even as the automated systems began to take over the role of the lighthouse keeper, the lighthouses themselves remained constant, their beams of light still illuminating the dark waters. For those who still live along the coast, and for those who make their living from the sea, the lighthouses remain sacred symbols, their beacons a reminder that even in the most remote, isolated places, there is always a light to guide the way. In the quiet hours of the night, when the sea is still and the fog wraps the coastline in a thick blanket, it's easy to imagine that the ghosts of the past are still watching over the lighthouses. The sound of the wind in the tower's creaking timbers, the soft hum of the light's beam as it turns, the mysterious figures glimpsed at the cliff's edge. These are the things that remind us that even as the world changes, the stories of the lighthouses live on. The lighthouses, now maintained by technology rather than the watchful eyes of a keeper, became quieter. The daily rituals that once filled their rooms, checking the lamp, winding the clock, polishing the lens, were replaced by machines, humming softly but efficiently. The solitary figure in the tower, braving the storms and solitude, was no longer a necessity. Yet, for all the convenience and advancement of technology, there was something deeply poetic about the human presence that had once filled those lighthouses. The keepers who had spent their lives tending the light often came to represent something more than mere caretakers of a lamp. They were the quiet warriors against the sea's endless fury, standing between nature's wildness and the fragile lives of the sailors. The isolation, the endless hours of watching over the horizon, created a bond between the keeper and the sea, a connection that was both humbling and powerful. It was not uncommon for a keeper to speak of the lighthouse as a living entity, something that needed their care and attention, almost as if the light itself had a soul. There are stories, often whispered in the shadows of these same lighthouses, of the moments when a keeper would stare out into the abyss of the night, as if seeking something just beyond the horizon. For many, it was said that the sea had a kind of pull, a quiet beckoning, calling the keeper to its depths. Those who had spent years standing guard against the relentless winds, who had lived by the rhythm of the tides, sometimes felt a kinship with the water itself, a longing to be part of it, to become one with the vast, unknowable expanse. And though the keeper's duty was to guard the lighthouse and protect those at sea, many could not escape the lure of the ocean's pull. Some, after years of service, simply disappeared. They would walk the cliffs one evening, vanish into the mist, and be seen no more. Sometimes it was said that these were men who had crossed the threshold of their own isolation, who had been claimed by the sea at last. Others believed they had simply walked away, their time spent in solitude finally taking its toll. The mystery of their disappearances lingered, adding to the ever-growing mythos surrounding the lighthouses. But even after the keepers were gone, the lighthouses continued to shine. Automated systems took over their duties, and many of the lonely towers that once stood as symbols of human endurance were left empty, their mechanical hearts ticking steadily on, though no one was there to hear it. The ghosts of the keepers, if they existed, would no longer wander the towers, nor would their footsteps echo down the long corridors of stone. Yet, the lighthouses remained, their lights still guiding the way for the ships that passed. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the sea was calm and the fog thick, some claimed to hear the soft, distant hum of the lighthouse's beam, as if the spirit of the keeper, though no longer physically present, still lingered, watching over the sea. Whether real or imagined, it became part of the lore that continued to grow around the Scottish Highlands' silent sentinels. These silent lighthouses, now largely automated, became symbols not just of the past, but of the unspoken truth of human perseverance against nature. For though the men and women who had once tended the lamps may have disappeared, the lighthouses were reminders of their quiet, unwavering duty. The light never faltered, even as the human presence within the towers faded away. In many ways, these lighthouses became like the sea itself, constant, but always changing. Their stories were told and retold, the names of the keepers fading into the mist, but their legacy lived on in the flickering light. The beam of the lighthouse cutting through the night became the beacon for a world that was slowly moving away from the isolation and solitude of the past. But even as the lighthouses grew silent, they remained symbols of the bond between humanity and the sea, a reminder that no matter how much time passed or how much technology advanced, there would always be something eternal about the light. The Highlands themselves remained unchanged. The winds still blew through the cliffs, the sea still crashed against the shore, and the mist still rose from the waters, cloaking the lighthouses in mystery. And in the quiet, in the cold wind, you might still catch the faintest glimpse of the ghosts of those who once stood there watching over the sea, their spirits lingering in the beam of the lighthouse that never stopped shining. The lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands are not only the silent sentinels of the sea, but also the silent witnesses to countless stories from the sailors who have relied on their light for guidance. While the keepers lived and worked within the walls of these solitary towers, the ships that passed through the waters below were often unaware of the lifelines they depended on. For centuries, the sea and its sailors were bound to these lighthouses, trusting their steady light to guide them through the darkest of nights, the thickest of fogs, and the wildest of storms. But to the sailors, these lighthouses were more than mere navigational aids. They were symbols of safety, of hope, and sometimes of warning. For the sailors who navigated the unpredictable waters off Scotland's coast, the lighthouses were often the last thing they would see before finding safe harbor. But these same sailors, who had spent countless hours at sea, also carried with them a host of superstitions and stories, many of which involved the lighthouses themselves. Some were born from the sailors' need to explain the unknown, while others were shaped by the harsh realities of the sea, its ability to both give and take life with terrifying indifference. One of the most persistent superstitions surrounding the Scottish lighthouses was the belief in the spirit light, a ghostly apparition seen off the coast, particularly on dark, foggy nights. Sailors spoke of seeing a flickering light in the distance, a light that would appear to guide them through the darkness. But as they neared it, the light would disappear, only to reappear again further away, leading them further into the mist. The light would continue to elude them, almost as if it were playing a cruel game. Some sailors believed this light was the manifestation of the restless spirits of those lost to the sea, who were trying to lead the living to their doom. The spirit light was not just a warning, but a reminder of the sea's unpredictable and dangerous nature. Many sailors told tales of ships that had followed the ghostly glow only to crash against the rocks, their hulls shattered, their crews lost to the cold waters. It was said that the spirit light was a harbinger of doom, a signal that death was drawing near. These stories were passed down through the generations, each one adding another layer to the mystique of the lighthouses, which were often seen as both protectors and foreboding omens. But the superstitions surrounding the lighthouses were not all rooted in fear. For many sailors, the lighthouses were symbols of hope, their steady beams offering a sense of comfort when the sea seemed endless and unforgiving. It was said that a sailor who had lost his way could always find solace in the light of a lighthouse, that no matter how dark the night, there was always the promise of land and safety on the horizon. The light in these tales represented more than just a navigational tool. It was a reminder of home, of loved ones waiting, of the journey's end. There were other, quieter stories too, tales told in the dim light of a tavern after a long voyage. Some sailors spoke of hearing the whispers of the lighthouse keepers in the night, calling out from the towers when the fog was thick and the winds were strong. They said the keepers would offer guidance, not just to ships but to the souls of the sailors themselves, guiding them through the unknown. In some traditions, it was believed that the lighthouse keeper's spirit would continue to tend the light long after death, ensuring that the flame would never go out, that the light would always shine for those who sailed through the storm. The most haunting tales, however, were those of ships that vanished without a trace, disappearing into the thick fogs that rolled in from the sea. These stories would often be whispered in taverns, their hushed tones warning of the danger of the mist, the places where the land met the sea, and where the boundaries between the living and the dead grew. The sailors who disappeared were said to have been claimed by the sea, their ships lost to the fog, and their bodies taken to the depths. The fog itself was said to be a kind of veil, a gateway between the world of the living and the spirits of the drowned. Some sailors claimed to have seen these spirits too, figures emerging from the mist, their faces obscured, beckoning to them from the darkness. These spirits were said to be the souls of sailors lost at sea, forever trapped in the fog, waiting for the ships that would never return. Those who were brave enough to speak of such things spoke in a hush, as if to speak too loudly would invite the spirits to call on them next. And then there was the sound, the eerie, mournful sound of the foghorn, which could often be heard in the distance, its deep bellow cutting through the fog like a warning. For some, the foghorn was a comfort, a sign that the lighthouse was still active, still watching over them. For others, it was a reminder of the isolation of the sea, the loneliness of the lighthouse standing in the fog, its light shining across the water, but offering no warmth, no solace. The sound of the foghorn would often grow louder as the fog thickened, its tone echoing through the night like a mournful cry. These tales, often laced with superstition and mystery, were part of the deep fabric of maritime life in the Highlands. The lighthouses were not simply functional structures. They were part of the mythos of the sea, bound up in stories of the supernatural, the ghosts of the past, and the eternal struggle between man and nature. They were as much a part of the landscape as the mountains and the cliffs, and just as steeped in mystery. Today, as the lighthouses continue to shine through the mist, their function, largely automated, they still carry the weight of those old legends. The beam of the light may now be maintained by machines, but the stories of the sailors, the ghosts, and the restless sea continue to echo through the Highlands. And when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, and the sound of the foghorn drifts across the water, it's easy to believe that the old stories still hold sway, that the lighthouses, though silent, continue to guard more than just the ships that pass by. They guard the memories of all those who have come before, their lives and their tales woven into the very stones that form the towers. As the years passed, the once vibrant life of the lighthouse keepers began to fade, replaced by the cold, efficient hum of technology. The Scottish Highlands, however, have a way of keeping their history alive. Even in the face of modernity, the lighthouses, though no longer manned by human hands, still stand as stoic watchtowers over the wild sea, their beams cutting through the ever-present fog. Their stories, woven into the fabric of the land and the sea, are far from over. These silent watchers, now automated but no less majestic, continue to hold a deep, almost mystical significance for those who live along the rugged coastline. For the people who inhabit these remote corners of Scotland, the lighthouses are more than just historical structures. They are symbols of endurance, of an older time when human hands guided the light, when the keepers lived in isolation and braved the storms to keep the light burning bright. The disappearance of the keepers and the automation of the lighthouses left a void, an absence that could never fully be filled. The machinery that now controls the light lacks the human touch, the stories of those who once lived within the tower's walls, and yet the lighthouses still remain, steadfast and unwavering, as if guarding not just the sea, but the memory of those who came before. The island communities that dot the coast of the Highlands continue to honor the legacy of the lighthouse keepers. Even though the men and women who once tended the lights are long gone, the lighthouses are still places of reverence, their importance ingrained in the local culture. In some villages, the lighthouses are treated as landmarks of great significance, their history entwined with the very identity of the people. The families who have lived by the sea for generations often speak with a quiet reverence about the keepers, how they would come down from the cliffs in the dead of night, carrying lanterns to guide their way, or how the light would flash across the waves, offering a sense of comfort and safety when the world felt impossibly vast. For the locals, the lighthouses are guardians of more than just the sea. They are guardians of their own history, markers of the hard-won battles that were fought against the harshness of the environment. In the face of the relentless storms and the often treacherous waters, the lighthouses stood as beacons of resilience. They were the physical manifestation of a commitment to survival, a testament to the spirit of those who lived and worked on the fringes of civilization. One of the most poignant symbols of this legacy is the Lighthouse Keepers Memorial, a simple stone structure erected in honor of the keepers who gave their lives to the light. The memorials can be found scattered across the Highlands, often located near the lighthouses themselves, standing as silent tributes to the men and women who once kept the watch. These memorials are more than just markers of death. They are celebrations of life, of the quiet bravery required to live in isolation, of the commitment to keep the light burning no matter the cost. The tales of the keepers, often passed down through families who had known them personally, still resonate today. The lighthouse keepers were men and women of quiet strength, often solitary figures, living in the shadow of the sea. They faced challenges that most people could never imagine: fierce storms, blizzards, endless nights with nothing but the beam of the lighthouse and the roar of the waves for company. Yet, they persevered, often sacrificing years of their lives to the lonely task of tending the light. Though the stories of these keepers have faded from the mainstream, they live on in the hearts of the Highland communities. Local pubs and small gatherings often become the place where the old tales are revived, shared with a quiet reverence. And in the moments before the first light of dawn, when the fog hangs thick over the water and the lighthouse beam cuts through the haze, there is still a sense of something ancient and enduring at work. The light, still shining through the mist, serves as a reminder that the sea, the land, and the people of the Highlands are forever intertwined. But the presence of the keepers is not just a thing of the past. There are those who claim that the spirits of the lighthouse keepers, though their human forms have long since faded, still watch over the lighthouses they once tended. In the darkest of nights, when the sea is particularly restless, some sailors and fishermen report seeing figures near the towers, standing silently at the windows, their eyes gazing out over the sea. Others claim to hear the faintest sound of footsteps on the cliffside, echoing the lives of those who walked those same paths long ago. While it's hard to say whether these reports are the result of superstition or genuine phenomena, one thing remains clear: the lighthouses continue to hold a place of deep emotional significance for those who live near them. For the people of the Highlands, the lighthouses stand as monuments to a way of life that has slowly faded but never truly disappeared. They are symbols of an enduring connection to the past, a past marked by sacrifice, bravery, and the quiet determination to light the way, even when no one is looking. As the years go by and the lighthouses of the Highlands become more distant from the daily lives of the people who once depended on them, they remain as powerful symbols of resilience, guardians of the sea, and the stories that linger in the darkness. And even though the keepers are gone, their legacy, etched into the stones of the lighthouses, whispered on the winds, and carried in the hearts of those who remember, continues to shine brightly across the Scottish coast. The Scottish Highlands, with their rugged landscapes, fierce winds, and unyielding seas, remain as untamed as they have always been. But as the years go by, the once vibrant role of the lighthouse keepers has become more and more like a faded memory. The technology that replaced the human hand is now the guardian of the light, automated systems that hume silently in the night, unmarked by the presence of the watchful keepers. Yet, even as the world around these lighthouses changes, something timeless about them remains. The silent lighthouses, standing tall against the elements, are still viewed with a quiet reverence by the people who live near them. Though their functions are now performed by machines, they continue to symbolize the strength and resilience of both the land and the people who have shaped their lives around it. The beacons of light that once represented the tireless vigilance of the keepers are now seen as symbols of an era gone by, an era when the human touch was paramount, when the lighthouses were the heartbeat of the sea's safety. As the lighthouses fade into the background of the modern world, however, there is a growing recognition of their deep cultural and historical importance. These lighthouses are no longer just functional structures, but have become part of Scotland's rich heritage. The once isolated towers, standing on their cliffs or islands, are now accessible to tourists, historians, and even those seeking a glimpse into the solitary lives of the lighthouse keepers. In the absence of the keepers, the lighthouses themselves have begun to serve as sites of pilgrimage for those who are drawn to the stories of the past. Visitors come from all over the world to see the lighthouses, some interested in the technical achievements that made these structures possible, and others captivated by the romanticized notion of the lighthouse keeper's life, a life of sacrifice, solitude, and dedication to a calling higher than self. The shift from human caretakers to automated systems has also led to a resurgence of interest in preserving the history of the lighthouses. Many of the old towers, now owned by government agencies or private organizations, have been restored and turned into museums. These museums, often housed in the former homes of lighthouse keepers, allow visitors to step into the past and experience what it might have been like to live in one of these isolated, wind-swept towers. The original equipment, the clocks, lenses, and foghorns, are displayed for all to see, alongside photographs and journals that document the daily lives of those who lived and worked there. In some lighthouses, the stories of the keepers are still told. Local guides, often descendants of those who once manned the towers, take visitors on tours, recounting the tales of their ancestors. They speak of the storms that rattled the windows and how the keepers' families would huddle together in the safety of the tower, hearing the fury of the wind and sea outside, yet knowing the light would continue to shine through it all. The guides tell of the moments when the light would break through the fog, signaling hope and safety to the sailors navigating the treacherous waters. And they recount the ghosts, some real, some born of local superstition, that still seem to linger in the towers, a quiet echo of the past. Even in their automated state, the lighthouses remain symbols of endurance, standing tall against the changing tides of both time and technology. The beacons that once represented a human presence in the vastness of the sea still serve as a guiding light, even as their human counterparts are no longer needed. The structures, though now silent, are more than just mechanical. They are monuments to the history of those who lived in their shadow, to the sacrifices made by the keepers and their families, and to the deep bond between humanity and the sea that continues to shape the people of the Highlands. There's a certain irony in the way that the lighthouses, once the lifeblood of the sea's safety, have become relics of the past in an age of instant communication, GPS systems, and satellite technology. Yet, there's also something deeply fitting about it. The lighthouses may have outlived their original purpose, but they've become something more lasting. The stories of the keepers, their lives entwined with the light, have become a part of the legend of the Highlands. And though the light now operates without the guiding hand of a keeper, the story of the lighthouses continues to shine. And for those who live near the lighthouses, those who still remember what it was like when the light was tended to by human hands, there's a deep sense of pride in their preservation. They speak of the lighthouses not just as practical structures, but as living reminders of a time when the sea was more than just an obstacle. It was a way of life, and the lighthouses were the protectors of that life. As the winds continue to howl across the cliffs and the waves crash against the rocks below, the lighthouses stands on, silent but enduring. They are the last witnesses to a time gone by, guardians of the sea, holding firm against the changing tides of time. And even as they continue their automated watch over the waters, their place in the hearts of the Highlanders remains as strong as ever. As the sun sets over the rolling hills of the Scottish Highlands, casting long shadows over the rocky shores, the lighthouses continue to stand as timeless symbols of both human perseverance and the relentless power of the sea. Though the keepers are long gone, their legacy remains firmly rooted in the land and the light. These beacons of hope, which once illuminated the paths of sailors braving the unpredictable waters, have now become more than just navigational tools. They are monuments to a bygone era, an enduring testament to the human spirit's quest for survival in a world that constantly shifts beneath our feet. The Scottish Highlands, with their mystical landscapes, continue to be defined by their relationship with the sea, a relationship that has shaped the people who call these rugged shores home. The lighthouses, now largely automated, are no longer the heartbeats of coastal villages, but they still pulse with significance. They have become integral parts of the Highlands' identity, revered not just by the locals who grew up with their light, but by visitors who come to these far-flung shores to witness the silent guardians of the sea for themselves. Even as technology has rendered the traditional role of the lighthouse keeper obsolete, the lighthouses themselves have become icons, symbols of something greater than the sum of their mechanical parts. They are the last physical remnants of an era when humanity fought to assert control over nature's most daunting forces. They remain steadfast, unyielding against the winds that howl off the North Sea, the storms that sweep across the coast, and the mist that rolls in, cloaking the land in an almost mystical fog. For those who live in the shadow of the lighthouses, they are more than just relics. They are storytellers, holding the history of the Highlands in their beams of light. The legends, myths, and stories of the keepers, their lives of quiet solitude, their courage in the face of the sea's fury have become the fabric of local folklore. Though the actual keepers may be gone, their stories live on, passed down from generation to generation, like the waves that perpetually crash against the rock. And yet, there's a quiet sadness that lingers. The stories of the keepers, the very people who embodied the spirit of the lighthouses, are slowly fading from living memory. The lighthouses, once places where families lived, worked, and struggled together, have become impersonal machines. The human connection that defined them is now a mere shadow, a memory preserved in photographs and museum displays. But in this, too, there is beauty. The very nature of the lighthouse is its ability to endure, to shine through the years without the need for a guiding hand. The beacon will continue to light the way for sailors and wanderers, no longer attended by the hands of its keepers, but still serving its purpose. Though the world around the lighthouses has changed, with modern technology rendering the role of the keeper obsolete, the lighthouses themselves have adapted to their new role. They are no longer just functional structures, but also symbols of the Highlands' resilience and history. Tourists now visit them, drawn by their beauty, their isolation, and their connection to Scotland's maritime past. Many lighthouses have been preserved as part of Scotland's cultural heritage, and some still offer tours, allowing visitors to explore their inner workings and learn about the lives of the keepers who once watched over the seas. In the quiet of the night, when the fog thickens and the lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, it's easy to imagine that the keepers are still there, watching over the sea as they did for so many years. Their ghosts perhaps linger in the lighthouse towers, standing guard against the storms, ensuring that the light never falters. The sound of the foghorn, the hum of the light, the steady rhythm of the waves, it all becomes a lullaby, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, that it continues to echo in the places we hold dear. For the future, the lighthouses will stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time. They will continue to do the ships that sail the sea, and the stories of the keepers will continue to be passed on to those who seek to understand the history that lives in the land. The lighthouses will shine through the fog, a beacon for those lost in the darkness, a reminder that even in the most isolated and inhospitable places, light can still be found. In the end, the lighthouses of the Scottish Highlands are more than just beacons. They are symbols of the resilience of the human spirit, and they will remain as guardians of the sea for generations to come. And so, in the dim light of the lighthouse tower, where the wind whispers and the sea roars, the legacy of the keepers, the stories of the lost sailors, and the light that never goes out, continue. The Highlands will always be home to these silent watchers, steadfast and eternal, standing strong against the tides of time. May this story settle in your heart like a whisper and may your dreams be calm and kind. Good night.